Alright, guys, today we are going to be reacting to male inequality explained by an expert, Richard Reeves. I think I've seen him a couple interviews, even in Dr. Phil. Let's see what the guy has to say.
A number of people warned me against writing a book about boys and men because it's such a fraught subject, particularly in politics right now, and because so many people were afraid that merely drawing attention to the problems of boys and men was implying somehow less effort being paid to girls and women, that it's framed as zero sum, and it's sort of a whose side are you on question, and you have to be on one side or the other rather than just being on the side of human flourishing. One of the real challenges here is that if there are men missing from certain crucial areas of our society and our economy, that makes it harder for other men and boys to flourish in those areas. We have an education system that has a dearth of male teachers. We have a labor market where the jobs that are growing fastest are ones where we have the fewest men. And in families, there's the growth in what you might call the dad deficit or fatherlessness. As men are struggling in each of those areas, what you'll see is it'll be harder for other men to follow in their footsteps. It's harder for boys to flourish if their fathers aren't engaged. It's harder for men to enter occupations where there aren't men. It's harder for boys to do well at school where there are no male teachers to be seen. And so there's a very real danger that unless we act quite soon, that we will set in train something of a vicious cycle. I'm Richard Reeves. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. And my latest book is Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why That Matters, and What to Do About it.
I'm very interested to see why is that reason. I hope it doesn't end up being like, well, it's you guys' fault. You men are the one that need to just fix it. I don't want to. If that's the conclusion, I can understand why would you get to such conclusion, but if it's gonna end up like that, I'm just saying.
The overall picture is that on almost every measure, at almost every age, and in almost every advanced economy in the world, the girls are leaving the boys way behind, and the women leaving the men.
Are they?
What nobody expected was that girls and women wouldn't just catch up to boys and men in education, but would blow right past them and keep going. Everyone was very focused, quite rightly, on getting to gender equality, getting to gender parity. It's not that long ago where there was a huge gender gap the other way, and there was huge focus, correctly, in the 70s and 80s to really promote women and girls in education. But the line just kept going, and nobody predicted that. Nobody was saying, what if gender inequality re-emerges in just as big a way as now, in some cases bigger, but the other way around? And to some extent, everyone's still trying to get their head around this new world where, at least in education, when you talk about gender inequality, you're pretty much always talking about the ways in which girls and women are ahead of boys and men. And that's happened in a very, very short period of human history. So if you look at the US, for example, in the average school district in the US, girls are almost a grade level ahead of boys in English and have caught up in math. If we look at those with the highest
Math?
GPA scores,
Really, in math? Really? Really, in math?
the top 10%, 2/3 of those are girls. If we look at those at the bottom, 2/3 of those are boys. When it comes to going to college, there's a 10 percentage gap in college enrollment, a similar sized gap in completing college, conditional on enrolling. And the result of those trends is that the gender gap in getting a college degree is now wider than it was in 1972, but the other way around. So in 1972, when Title IX was passed to promote more gender equality in education, there was a 13 percentage point gap in favor of men getting college degrees. Now there's a 15 percentage point gap in favor of women getting college degrees. So the gender inequality we see in college today is wider than it was 50 years ago. It's just the other way around.
Yeah, but at the same time, what kind of degrees these females are taking? Is engineer, mathematicians? Like it's easy to say that stat, but if those jobs has to do with infrastructure, where it really is gonna help society, or it's just one of these useless degrees? That's a good question.
There's quite a fierce debate about the differences between male and female brains. And in adulthood, I think there's not much evidence that the brains are that different in ways that we should worry about or that are particularly consequential. But where there's no real debate is in the timing of brain development. It is quite clear that girls' brains develop more quickly than boys' brains do, and that the biggest difference seems to occur in adolescence. So what happens is in adolescence, we develop what neuroscientists call the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex of our brain is sometimes known as the CEO of the brain. It's the bit of your brain that says you should do your chemistry homework rather than going out to party. It's the bit of your brain that says it is worth maintaining a high GPA because it will help you get to college, which might help you in the future. And that bit of the brain develops considerably earlier in girls than in boys, between 1 and 2 years earlier, partly because girls go into puberty a bit earlier than boys, and that seems to trigger some of this development. What that means is that if you have an education system that rewards the ability to turn in homework, stay on task, worry about your GPA, prepare for college and so on, then just structurally, that's going to put at an advantage the group whose brains have developed earlier in those particular areas. And that turns out on average to be girls. I think it's a great irony of women's progress that by taking the brakes off women's educational opportunities and aspirations, we've revealed the fact that the education system is slightly structured against boys and men because of these differences in the timing of brain development. But it took the women's movement to show that, because the natural advantages of women in education were impossible to see when women's aspirations were being capped by a sexist society. Now that those caps have been largely removed, we can see that it's boys and men who are at a disadvantage in the education system. At the risk of sounding boring, let's collect the data first so we know what we're dealing with here. I do think that we should be strongly encouraging boys to start school a year later than girls. I think that should become the default in many school districts because of the developmental gap that there is between boys and girls. Because boys' brains mature more slowly, then them starting school a year later would mean that they were developmentally closer to being peers with the girls.
Hold up. So the male brain matured later? A year later? What is... Really? You guys need to help in this one. You guys have to put like a source in the links or links in the comment section below, because I don't know about that.
In the classroom, we need a lot more male teachers. It's striking that the teaching profession has become steadily more female over time. Only 24% of K-12 teachers now are male. That's down from 33% in the 80s. And fewer men are applying to teacher training year on year. And so we've seen this steady shift towards a close to an all-female environment. That has all kinds of consequences for the ethos of the school, for the way we deal with different kinds of behavior among boys and girls, for example. And so we need a very serious and intentional effort to get more men into teaching. The third thing I would do in this world where I have significant power to dictate policies would be significantly more investment in vocational education.
There you go. That's different right there. I agree with that. It's just so different, guys. Guys tend to be more handy instead of just staying in the room and just listening to the teacher. It doesn't translate well.
That is an area where we do seem to see better results for boys and men on average, and one that's woefully underinvested in the US. The US has really bet most of its dollars on a very academic, a very narrow route towards success, and less emphasis on vocational training. And that has actually put boys and men at a disadvantage. So apprenticeships, technical high schools are actually a really good way to help more boys and men. I think one of the challenges with this debate is that if you're talking to women and men who are, say, at the top of the economic ladder, 4-year college degrees, decent incomes, they look around and they don't see some of these issues. But that's not the same for working class men. That's not the same for men lower down the economic ladder. So there's a danger that we're so busy, to borrow Sheryl Sandberg's phrase, so busy leaning in that we don't look down. The reality for men further down the ladder is very different. The economic trends for men have turned downwards along 4 dimensions. One is wages. Most men today earn less than most men did in 1979. In employment, with a drop in labor force participation of 8 percentage points, which means 9 million men now of prime age are not working. We've seen a drop in occupational stature, and so there are now more men working in employment areas which are seen as lower status than they were in the past. And we've also seen a drop in the acquisition of skills, the kinds of skills and education that boys and men need. If boys don't get educated and men don't get skilled, they will struggle in the labor market. And across all of those domains, we've seen a downwards turn for men in the last 4 or 5 decades. And so the way in which social class divides have opened up, economic inequality has widened, is really important.
Man, I'm saying these guys tend to talk too much, man. Too much in the a lot of sweet words, a lot of sugar in his way of talking. I don't know.
Understand in the context of gender inequality. If we only focus on gender gaps, then we miss the fact that both men and women at the top have done increasingly well, but that's much less true of everybody else, and especially it's less true of those from lower income backgrounds, working class boys and men, and black boys and men. You see many of those trends are amplified, and so those boys and men are really at the sharpest end of many of the social and economic changes. On the one hand, we have a huge and successful and laudable effort to get more women into STEM jobs, so science, technology, engineering, and math.
But they don't want it. That's the problem. They don't want those jobs, and I think we're just wasting time. We're trying to be so equal that we just giving too many resources to the gender that doesn't want to do these kind of jobs. Oh my goodness, I don't know what to think about this. These kind of conversations are weird because I understand that Richard can identify that there's a problem with men, but it's always end up in these kind of conversation, which is just a wasteful conversation.
On the other side, we have what I call heal jobs. So that's health, education, administration, and literacy, almost, if you like, the opposite side of the coin to STEM jobs. And that's where a lot of the jobs are coming from. Health and education alone are huge and growing sectors in the US. And so by my estimates, for every 1 job we're going to create in STEM between now and 2030, we're going to create 3 in heal jobs. But those jobs are at least as gender segregated as STEM jobs, but in the other direction. And unlike STEM, becoming more so over time. So if you look at the heal sector, only 24% of the workers in those sectors are male, and that number is falling. And in particular sectors, we're seeing a really precipitous drop in the number of men. We have a drop in the number of male teachers. We have a very sharp drop in the number of male psychologists. That's dropped from 39% male to 29% male in the last decade alone. And among psychologists under the age of 30, only 5% are male. So we roll that forward, and we're going to see psychology becoming essentially almost an all-female profession. So these jobs, which are both crucial, I think, for society.
So, but why is that? Why a lot of males say, you know what, I'm not going to be a psychologist. This is not my job anymore. I'm just getting rid of this. I'm not even interested. And the same with teaching. Why is that? Why is that? That's a good question. Why is that?
And where it'd be very useful to have more diversity are actually becoming more gender segregated. And so we have absolutely no effort.
Because I think diversity means, in the woke literature, means getting rid of. More than and getting rid of. In this case, they want to get rid of men. That's the diversity for them.
More men into heal jobs, which is where I think the future lies and where we should be helping men to move. One of the problems that we face is what I call in the book a dad deficit. And that can be seen in various different ways. So 1 in 4 fathers don't live with their children. If parents split up, they're much more likely to lose contact with their fathers and with their mothers. And so 1 in 3 children, if their parents split up, don't see their father at all after a few years post
There you go. There we go.
Fatherlessness is something that's very, very specific. And when 4 in 10 children are born outside marriage, and most children to less educated parents are born outside marriage, then we have to reinvent what it means to be a father. Because right now, men are still being held to an
we have to reinvent what it means to be a father?
Old standard of what it meant to be a successful father in a world where that is neither possible for many of
But a word. But why we have to change seeing their work in the past? Why? Why we have to? It worked. It worked. It brought us to what we have today as a society. It worked. It works even today. I told you he was gonna end up with that kind of argument. Man, I don't know. You guys have to let me know. I'm gonna just leave the rest of the video in the description down below. But I think it worked. You cannot redefine what a father means. You cannot redefine what the father is. You can't do that. It worked for thousands of years. Now you cannot simply change it just to somehow just to compete against the women. You cannot do that. If women are equally as competitive as guys, just to take all those help, let them compete and see what happens. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you guys see in the comment section below. I would love to hear your guys' opinion. I'll see you in the next one.